I was standing at the dock in Miami, a suitcase at my feet, sunscreen stinging my eyes. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Around me, families were taking photos, laughing, waving at the massive ship preparing to leave port. I was wearing a new sundress, yellow with small blue flowers. I had bought it for this trip. A family cruise, my first vacation in years. My son Mark had said, "Mom, everything will be perfect. You deserve a break." When my phone buzzed, I smiled automatically, expecting a message about where to meet them. Instead, I saw 5 short words that ended something inside me. "You're not coming. This is a family cruise." First, I thought it was a joke. I read it twice, then 3 times. But when I saw Mark, his wife Claire, and the grandchildren at the check-in gate, all wearing matching shirts and carrying their luggage, I understood. It was not a mistake. It was a decision. I called his name. He heard me. He turned, gave a quick, uncomfortable wave, and turned back toward the attendant. I watched them hand over their passports, laughing as the children tugged at their sleeves. The line moved forward. I stood there, motionless, my suitcase beside me, the sound of the ship's horn echoing like something final. When the vessel began to pull away, I stood in the heat like a forgotten prop from an old movie. The laughter, the music, the scent of sunscreen and champagne, all of it drifted farther until it was only noise carried by the wind. Only one thought comforted me as I turned toward the taxi stand. The house they lived in was still in my name. Let me know where you're tuning in from, and like this video if you've ever been told you couldn't do something, and proved them wrong. Back home in Austin, I did not turn on the lights. I sat in the dark living room and let my eyes adjust to the gray outlines of furniture I had dusted, polished, and paid for. The air held the faint scent of lemon oil and last week's coffee. On the walls, the family photos told a timeline I had tried not to notice. In the early ones, I stood in the center with a sleeping infant in my arms. Later, I moved to the edge of group shots. In the most recent, I was not there at all. The absence felt louder than the air conditioner's hum. Mark had said we titled the house in my name to simplify the mortgage. That was 5 years ago, on June 18, 2020. He had stood in my kitchen with a pen and a list. "Less red tape," he said. "We will refinance later." I had believed him because I wanted to. I took the accordion folder from the hall cabinet and spread the papers across the table. The warranty deed recorded at Travis County showed my name alone. Alicia Park, an unmarried woman. Date stamped, June 18, 2020. Doc hashtag 2020-147833. The property tax bills from 2021 through 2024 were addressed to me at my apartment. My checks had cleared on October 1 each year. $6,482. 17 $6,739. 04 $6,955. 87,104. 22. Proof of payment sat in neat rows of bank statements. I had always kept receipts. Paper does not forget. I dialed Mr. Grayson. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Park," he said. His voice was clean and unhurried, like a scale on a piano. "Arthur," I said. "I need clarity. The house on Spring Willow." He did not ask why. He asked for the address, the recording number, and 10 quiet minutes. I listened to him type. I watched the night settle deeper into the room. Finally, he said, "The title is yours. Fee simple absolute. No lien other than the primary mortgage which you also hold. The note is in your name. The taxes are paid by you. I see no joint tenancy, no life estate, no written agreement granting occupancy to your son. There is no recorded transfer, no deed of gift, no trust." He paused. "Do you expect a dispute?" "I expect pressure," I said. "The kind that calls itself family." "Your legal position is sound," he said. "If you wish to remove occupants, we will proceed by notice. 30 days. You are not required to explain." The line went still. I looked at the photos again, at the frame from Christmas 2019 where I stood behind the couch, one hand on Mark's shoulder while he held Claire's waist. I heard my own voice, low and plain. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson," I said. "I think I know what to do." After we hung up, I pulled a spiral notebook from the drawer and wrote the word fax at the top of a fresh page. I listed what could not be argued. June 18, 2020. Warranty deed, sole owner, Alicia Park. July 3, 2020. Initial mortgage payment draft from my account ending 11/26. October 1, 2021 to October 1, 2024. Property taxes paid by me, 4 consecutive years. December 24, 2022 new HVAC. Invoice number 88421, $8,316.47 paid by my card. April 15, 2024. Roof repair. Invoice number 4492, $2,190.00. Paid by check number 3071. I turned the page and wrote the other timeline, the one that had no invoices but left marks just the same. Fewer calls after 2021. Thanksgiving 2022. Too busy. Christmas 2023. We are staying with Claire's parents. September 2, 2025, 3:14 p.m. Port of Miami. You are not coming. This is a family cruise. I sat with both pages and felt the two columns argue in the quiet, the money I spent and the space I lost. I poured a glass of water and drank it down to the last flat swallow. At 9:42 p.m. My bank app recorded an alert. Attempted login failed. Unknown device. I wrote it down. At 9:55 p.m. Mark texted, "Mom, where are you? We need to talk." At 10:01 p.m. Claire sent a second message. "Hope you got home safe. We can reimburse you for the dress." I set the phone face down. I opened the file again and found the scanned email from April 2, where Claire had forwarded a draft document. Transfer of ownership draft. The subject line had been innocent. For when we sort out the paperwork this summer. Attached, a template with blank lines that assumed the signature would be mine. I remembered that I had never answered. Silence had been a habit I wore like an old sweater. I printed that draft now and slid it into a clear sleeve. Evidence is cleaner when it breathes on paper. At 10:30 p.m. I called Lisa, who had sold me my first house in 1989 and had kept my birthday on her calendar ever since. "Lisa," I said, "I need to talk about Spring Willow. The bungalow Mark lives in," she said carefully. She had a realtor's memory. "Yes," I said. "It is time to sell." She did not gasp or ask if I was certain. She said, "I will pull comps tonight, schedule photos tomorrow, and send the listing documents by noon." Occupied sale? "For now," I said. "Not for long." We agreed on a price band, $589,000 to start, a plan to review after the first weekend. She suggested a Thursday listing to catch the early traffic. I wrote the date, September 11, 2025. List goes live. My pen did not shake. When I ended the call, I took one last slow walk through my apartment. The aloe on the windowsill needed water. The Afghan my sister had crocheted lay folded on the couch. The clock in the hall ticked its dry seconds. The quiet steadied me. I was not angry. Anger is noisy. I felt something else, something like the sound of a drawer sliding closed. At 11:12 p.m. I wrote one more sentence under the word fax, set apart by 2 lines. Effective immediately, my money is off the table. I capped the pen, turned off the lamp, and let the room go dark. The decision did not flare. It settled. The next morning I woke before dawn. The light over Austin was gray and unfinished. The kind that makes even the most familiar rooms look like someone else's house. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and stared at the row of notes from last night. The timelines, the invoices, the photographs of signatures. The papers formed a pattern as clear as any map. At 6:07 a.m. I called Lisa again. "It will show as owner-occupied," I said. "But I have the keys. The listing should say move-in ready." "Understood," she said. "Would you like professional staging?" "No. Let it look lived in. Real." By 8 a.m. she had texted me the preliminary photos. The camera captured every detail I remembered. The bay window Mark had begged me to replace, the porch light that flickered unless you twisted the switch twice, the oak tree I had planted when he graduated high school. It had grown thick and wide, roots pressing against the sidewalk like something trying to break free. At 9:30 a.m. I drove to Spring Willow. The key they had left me, for emergencies, was still on my ring. My hand hesitated before turning it. I half expected the door to resist, but it opened easily, as if the house had been waiting. Inside, the smell was different: strong detergent, perfume, and the faint sweetness of air freshener trying to hide the truth of living. I stood in the entryway for a long time, taking it in. The living room had changed completely. My old walnut table was gone, replaced by something glass and metal. A family photo sat on the mantel, the kind printed large enough to make a point. Mark and Claire, the two children in matching blue outfits, a beach behind them. I was nowhere in it. The only trace of me was a cardboard box pushed into the corner of the coat closet. It was labeled in thick black marker "Mom Stuff." I carried the box to the kitchen table. Inside were pieces of my life reduced to inventory: an embroidered pillow, a ceramic bird from my mother's shelf, a few holiday cards, all rubber-banded together. The handwriting on the label was Claire's. Her tidy, teacher-perfect print. I placed the box back where I found it. In the kitchen, a stack of mail sat beside the toaster. Most were bills, a few addressed to current resident. But one envelope was open, flattened, and weighed down by a mug. The heading read "Transfer of Ownership Draft." The date at the top, August 14, 2025. The recipient line, "From Alicia Park to Mark and Claire Johnson." In the corner, a sticky note with Claire's handwriting. "Just need Mom's signature when she's ready." I took a photo with my phone. Then I slid the document back under the mug exactly as it had been. In that moment everything sharpened: the cruise, the tone of Mark's last phone call, the way Claire had stopped calling me Mom and started using my first name, the questions about whether I still managed my own finances. It was all a slow preparation for this. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan. I walked through the rest of the house quietly like a guest. The guest room had become a storage area. My framed needlework piece, "Home is Earned Daily," was lying face down on the floor. In the children's room, the wallpaper I had paid for was already peeling near the corners. Life had moved on inside these walls without me. When I reached the backyard, I stopped at the fence. The grass was patchy, and the old garden bed I used to keep full of rosemary and tomatoes was now bare. The metal stakes still marked the outline. I knelt down and pressed my fingers into the soil. It was dry, unturned, waiting. I stood again and whispered to no one, "It is still mine." Back inside, I closed every window, locked the door, and left without slamming it. That afternoon, I sent Lisa the confirmation to list. I attached the house photos and wrote simply, "Proceed." She replied at 3:17 p.m. "Done. MLS upload tonight. Expect early interest." By evening, I had 3 voicemails from Mark. His tone shifted between casual and forced concern. "Mom, we just saw some activity on the listing site. Are you selling? Maybe it's a mistake?" A few hours later, "Mom, please call me. Claire's freaking out. We can explain." And then the last one, quieter. "Why are you doing this?" I did not answer. I needed the silence to harden into something usable. At 9 p.m, Lisa texted, "Offer expected within 24 hours. Hot market." At 9:10, I opened my bank app and reviewed balances. Savings, $214,702. Mortgage payoff amount, $168,900. Projected profit after sale, roughly $375,000. Enough for peace. That night I wrote a letter, simple and final. "Mark, Claire, the house you live in has always been legally mine. When you said it was a family cruise, I realized I am not part of your family. Your belongings will be moved to storage. Mr. Grayson has the keys. I hold no grudge. I just no longer wish to be a spare part of your lives. Mom." I printed it on clean white paper and signed my full name beneath the neat line. 2 days later, a young couple from Dallas, both doctors, earnest and polite, toured the house. Lisa called me from the driveway. "They love it," she said. "Full price offer. No contingencies." I signed electronically that evening. The closing date was set for October 1, 2025. That weekend, I rented a small storage unit on North Lamar Avenue and hired a moving company. The workers were careful, quiet men who did not ask questions. I told them to move only the contents of the closets and children's bedrooms. "No furniture," I said. "Just personal items." They finished in 3 hours. I met Mr. Grayson at his office that Monday morning. His secretary, neat as a pin, handed me an envelope with a key and a receipt. Unit 114, she said. Paid for 6 months. I nodded. Tell your son, Mr. Grayson said gently, that this is business, not punishment. I already did, I said. He just does not recognize the language. When I drove back to Spring Willow for the final time, I parked across the street and watched from the car. The curtains were drawn. Claire's SUV was gone. A neighbor waved from across the yard, uncertain whether to approach. I raised a hand and lowered it again. Inside, I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, under the mug that had once held the false document. I took one last look around. The air was still, faintly citrus from cleaning spray. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and slipped the key through the mail slot. No tears came. No triumph either. Just a strange sense of balance, as though an old equation had finally settled into its right numbers. Back home, I packed my own suitcase again, but this time for myself. I opened a map, found Seattle, and circled it in pen. Years ago, before retirement and obligation, I had wanted to live there. The ocean, the mist, the quiet streets. At dawn, I left Austin. The sky behind me turned red as I drove north. When I reached Seattle 2 days later, I rented a small apartment with a view of the bay. The first morning, I bought a clay pot and planted jasmine on the balcony. I started a notebook labeled Beginnings. Each evening, I sat by the window and watched the fog roll across the water. Sometimes I thought about Mark's face at the dock, surprised, maybe a little ashamed, but I did not replay it with bitterness. I simply let it exist, a fact among others. He texted me 3 times in the following weeks. Mom, did you really sell the house? Mom, where are you? The kids miss you. I read each one and left it unanswered. Silence had become my truest form of speech. 1 month later, a letter arrived from Mr. Grayson. The sale is fully complete. The funds are secure. The house is transferred. I placed that letter in a folder labeled Endings, and I smiled a little. Because for the first time in years, both folders, Beginnings and Endings, belonged only to me. The day of closing was quiet. No ceremony, no signatures in a crowded office, just a few calm clicks on my laptop. The sale papers arrived in my inbox, bright and official. I read each line slowly, though I already knew what they said. Ownership transferred. Funds deposited. A small legal goodbye. Outside, a thin rain swept across Seattle Bay. The gulls drifted above the water, white against the gray sky. I made tea and let the steam rise over my hands. I had imagined that moment for months. Not the victory of it, but the stillness that follows when a long burden finally rolls off your shoulders. That night, I wrote a letter to my son. It took 3 drafts before the words came out right. Mark, Claire, the house you lived in was always legally mine. When you said it was a family cruise, I realized I am not part of your family. Your things have been moved to a storage unit. Mr. Grayson has the key. I hold no anger. I simply no longer wish to be the extra piece of your lives. Mom. I printed it on plain paper, folded it twice, and placed it in an envelope without a return address. The next morning, I mailed it from the small post office near the pier. The woman behind the counter looked at the address and smiled kindly, as if she thought I was sending a birthday card. I did not correct her. When I left the post office, I walked along the harbor. The water smelled of salt and seaweed, that sharp, honest smell that never tries to hide what it is. Fishing boats clinked against the docks. I stopped near a bench and let the wind push my hair across my face. It was the first day I truly believed I had stepped out of their story. I had found an apartment on a quiet street in Ballard, just a few blocks from the shore. It was small, 1 bedroom, a balcony that caught the morning sun, and a kitchen big enough for one person to move around without bumping into anyone else. I bought a second-hand table and a set of dishes with tiny blue lines around the rim. Everything matched in its modest way. The first week felt strange. I woke too early expecting noise, calls, needs. Instead, there was only the sound of seagulls and the distant hum of the ferry. I filled the time by planting herbs in pots along the balcony railing. Basil, thyme, and a single sprig of jasmine that leaned toward the light. Lisa called to tell me that the new owners had moved in. They seem nice, she said. Young doctors. They plan to start a family. That sounds good, I answered. You sure you are all right with it, Alicia? I am more than all right, I said. I am free of it. After we hung up, I sat with that sentence for a long time. Free of it. The words did not mean joy, not exactly. They meant quiet, an uncluttered kind of peace. The money from the sale rested untouched in my account. For once, it did not call to be spent. I used only what I needed. Rent, groceries, paint supplies for the evening class I had joined at the community center. The instructor, a woman near my age named Helen, painted seascapes with a steady hand and a patient voice. She never asked about my past, she only corrected my brush angle and said, "You're learning to see what matters." Each evening, I walked to the waterfront with a thermos of green tea. Sometimes I watched children feed breadcrumbs to the pigeons. Sometimes I just listened to the low, endless breathing of the ocean. Then one evening my phone lit up. Mark's name appeared on the screen. For a moment my old instinct flared, to answer, to soothe, to step back into the familiar chaos. But I let it ring until it stopped. He called again the next night, then again. Finally a message arrived. "Mom, did you really sell the house?" I stared at the words for a long time before setting the phone face down. The next message came 2 days later. "Mom, where are you? The kids miss you." The word "miss" caught in my chest, but I did not reply. I had already learned that silence, used with care, can be stronger than any speech. Weeks passed. The trees along the harbor turned from green to rust-colored gold. The city grew colder, the air sharper. I began to know the faces of people at the cafe downstairs. The young barista with tired eyes, the man who read the newspaper by the window every morning. They did not know my story, and that was a comfort. One gray afternoon, a letter arrived from Mr. Grayson. It was short and businesslike. "The sale is complete. The funds are secure. No further action required." I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer labeled Endings. That night, I slept without waking once. Later, I learned through a friend from Austin that Mark and Claire were having difficulties. "Financial trouble," she said in a hesitant voice, as though it might wound me to hear it. Mark had moved into a rented apartment. Claire had taken the children to her parents' home. I thanked her for telling me, but I did not ask for details. There was no victory in their loss. Still, one evening, near the end of winter, Mark called again. I answered. His voice was quiet, stripped of all its old confidence. "Mom," he said, "I was a terrible son. I ruined everything." I listened. Then I said, "No, Mark. You only put family where it did not belong, above the person who gave it to you." He did not argue. We both stayed silent for a while, two people standing on opposite sides of a bridge that had finally stopped burning. "Can I come visit?" he asked. "Not today," I said. "But someday, yes." After we hung up, I sat by the window and looked at the lights trembling on the water. The world was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt exact, as if everything had finally returned to its proper size. I wrote a final line in my notebook that night. "Peace is not owed. It is earned the moment you stop paying for someone else's comfort." Then I closed the notebook, watered the jasmine, and let the scent drift into the room. It smelled like something clean and new, something that had waited a long time for air. Spring came to Seattle as if someone had lifted a gray veil. One morning I woke to sunlight filling the apartment, pale and kind, and realized the jasmine on my balcony had started to bloom. Its small white flowers opened without permission, without fear. I stood there barefoot, breathing in that sweet, unbothered scent and thought, so this is what it means to begin again. I rented a corner of the community garden near the pier. The soil was dark and soft, easy to turn with a small spade. I planted lettuce, mint, and peas, things that grow fast and reward patience. Every few days I met the other gardeners, mostly older women like me, women who had learned how to make peace with their own quiet. We traded advice, seedlings, sometimes just smiles. No one asked about families. Everyone understood silence. At night, I took my painting class more seriously. Helen, the instructor, told me to stop painting what I saw and start painting what I felt. One evening, she placed a blank canvas in front of me and said, "Paint the moment you stop being afraid." I stood there for a long time, brush trembling in my hand before I began. I painted the Miami dock, not the ship or the crowd, just the space where I had been standing, the emptiness that had once felt unbearable. When I was done, the canvas was mostly blue and white, with one small figure at the edge facing away. Helen said nothing, just touched my shoulder once. Each day followed its own small rhythm. Morning tea, balcony watering, garden work, painting in the evenings. I kept my phone off most of the time. Still, the messages arrived. Mom, please talk to me. Mom, the kids miss you. Mom, we can explain. The tone shifted slowly from defensive to pleading. I read each one carefully before deleting it. There is power in deciding when silence speaks for you. When I walked to the harbor, I often saw families boarding the same kind of ships I once watched leave without me. They posed for photographs, laughing, waving at strangers who pretended to wave back. I felt no bitterness anymore, only distance, like watching a movie I had once loved but outgrew. One Sunday morning, I bought a second-hand bicycle. The man who sold it to me said it had good bones. I rode it along the waterfront trail, the wind pulling at my hair. My legs ached, but I did not care. For the first time in years, movement felt like choice, not obligation. By early summer, I had finished 3 small paintings and entered them into a local exhibition at the community center. They were accepted. On the evening of the show, I wore the same yellow sundress I had bought for that cruise. The neckline had faded slightly, and the fabric was softer now. It no longer felt like a costume for someone else's dream. After the opening, Helen handed me a folded sheet of paper. "Keep this," she said. Inside was a note. "You painted your freedom. Do not give it back." I walked home through streets glowing with streetlights and quiet rain. My shoes were soaked, my hair clinging to my face, but I felt lighter than I had in decades. In August, Mark called again. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. His voice was calmer now, stripped of excuses. "Mom," he said, "I moved to a small apartment. I'm doing better. Claire took the kids to her parents for a while. I see them on weekends. I know I have no right to ask, but would you ever consider visiting?" I said nothing at first. The only sound was the slow creak of my rocking chair. Then I said, "Someday, when there's no debt left between us." He exhaled, a sound halfway between relief and grief. "I understand." After that, we spoke occasionally, short calls, steady and polite. No talk of the house, no talk of money. Just weather, the children's schools, my garden. The small kind of conversation that rebuilds trust grain by grain. By the following spring, I decided to return to Austin, not to reclaim anything, but to plant new roots on my own terms. I found a small brick house near the botanical garden, 1 story, easy to keep clean. The backyard had an old pecan tree that shaded half the yard. I bought it with part of the money from the sale, paying in full. When I first unlocked the door, the echo inside startled me. Empty houses always sound like they are listening. I unpacked slowly. A bed, a table, my paints, the jasmine plant I had carried in the passenger seat all the way from Seattle. I placed it on the porch, and by dusk, it had already begun to reach toward the Texas sun. 2 weeks after I settled in, Mark visited. He arrived with the children, carrying a grocery bag filled with things for dinner. I watched him from the window as he parked and sat for a moment, gathering himself. When he finally knocked, I opened the door and smiled. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Hello, Mark. Come in." He looked older, thinner around the eyes. The children ran past him, their laughter bouncing through the empty rooms. He followed me into the kitchen, where I had already set out plates. For a while we cooked together in silence. Then, as he chopped vegetables, he said, "I've been thinking a lot about what I did." "I know," I said. "I thought having everything meant keeping everyone close. But I was wrong. I rinsed the rice under cold water. You confuse closeness with control. Most people do." He nodded. No argument, no excuses. That was new. Dinner was simple. Rice, vegetables, grilled fish. We ate slowly, the children talking about school, their voices bright and unguarded. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close to peace. When they left, Mark hugged me lightly and said, "This place suits you." "It does," I replied. "It is the right size for the truth." After the door closed, I sat on the porch and watched the last light fade behind the pecan tree. The jasmine beside me had opened another flower. The scent drifted through the warm evening air, quiet and honest. I realized that the story was no longer about loss or betrayal. It was about reclamation, the slow, steady work of coming home to oneself after years of being spent on others. I poured a cup of tea and wrote in my notebook, "Home is not where they remember you. Home is where you remember yourself." The crickets began their chorus. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed, the sound carried by the wind. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I was not waiting for anyone to arrive, to explain, to make amends. The waiting part of my life was over. The next morning I woke early, watered the garden, and felt the earth cool beneath my hands. The jasmine brushed against my wrist, its leaves damp with dew. Above me the pecan branches rustled softly. The world for once felt entirely my own. By late summer the Texas air grew heavy again, full of the sound of insects and faraway trains. I was sitting on the porch one evening when Lisa from Seattle called. She was in town visiting family and wanted to stop by. We sat together under the pecan tree, drinking lemonade, and I told her I had started volunteering at the botanical garden. She laughed softly and said, "You always did like things that grow quietly." When she left, the house settled into its familiar silence. That night I dreamed of the dock again, the ship leaving, my suitcase at my feet. But this time I was not stranded. I was already walking away toward the road, carrying only my own bag. A week later, I ran into an old neighbor from Austin at the farmer's market. Her name was Julia, a friend of Claire's mother. She hesitated when she saw me, then said, "I heard about what happened with Mark and Claire. I'm so sorry." I waited, not sure which part she meant. "They've been going through a rough time," she continued. "Financial trouble, I think. There was talk about therapy, separation, all that." Her voice lowered. "Claire moved back with her parents. Mark's renting a small place near South Congress. People say he's working long hours again, trying to rebuild." I thanked her and changed the subject, but the information sat in my mind like a pebble in a shoe. That evening, I took my notebook to the porch and wrote, "What collapses was already hollow." It was not satisfaction, just recognition. I had not wanted them to suffer, only to understand the cost of what they had done. The years I had poured into their comfort, the quiet assumption that I would always be there. A month passed before Mark called again. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of slow day when even the wind seems lazy. "Mom," he said. His voice sounded smaller. "I know you heard about the separation." "I did. It's my fault. I ruined everything." "No," I said. "You did not ruin everything. You only revealed it." He went quiet for a while, and I could hear traffic in the background. Then he said, "I've been thinking about what you said. About family. You were right." "About what part?" "That I confused love with ownership. I thought giving meant control." "Many people do," I said. "It's how we lose each other." There was a long pause. His breathing steadied. "Can I come visit?" "Not today," I said gently. "But someday, yes." After we hung up, I sat on the porch long after dark. The night smelled of cut grass and earth. I thought of him alone in his apartment, maybe staring at the walls the way I once did. There was no pleasure in it, only a soft ache that felt like honesty. Weeks later he came by for the first time. He brought the children with him. They were taller, louder, and full of stories. Claire did not come. I met them at the gate, half expecting tension, but there was none. Mark carried a paper bag of groceries, lemons, herbs, fish, and said, "We thought we'd cook for you this time." In the kitchen we moved around each other quietly, not the way families rush and interrupt, but like people who have learned the value of space. The children set the table. I watched Mark's hands as he worked, steady, patient, the hands of a man who had finally stopped running from his own mistakes. When dinner was ready we sat outside. The air was cool, and the garden lights cast soft circles on the grass. The children laughed about school projects, spilled water, and teased each other. I listened and felt the evening stretch open like a calm field. After they left, Mark lingered at the door. "Mom," he said, "thank you for letting us come." "You don't have to thank me. You're learning." "Learning what?" "That love is not debt." He smiled faintly, nodded, and went to the car. When the gate closed behind them, I exhaled deeply, as if I had been holding my breath for years. In the weeks that followed he came more often, always bringing the children. Sometimes they helped me in the garden, sometimes we baked bread. There were no grand apologies, no confessions, just small, consistent gestures that began to rebuild something steadier than forgiveness. Respect. Claire stayed away until one Sunday in November. She arrived with a bouquet of lilies, her expression careful. I met her at the porch. "Hello, Claire." "Hello, Mrs. Park," she said, then corrected herself softly. "Alicia." The silence between us was long but not hostile. Finally she said, "I didn't understand how you felt. I thought you were just being distant." "I was protecting what was left," I said. She nodded. "I'm sorry. Some apologies do not require answers." I just nodded back. She placed the flowers on the porch table and left soon after. That evening, I sat with the lilies beside me. Their scent filled the air, strong, clean, unashamed. I thought about how fragile they looked and how easily they opened anyway. When I went inside, I wrote another line in my notebook. "Forgiveness is not a door. It is a window that opens when the house is safe again." That night I slept easily. The next morning, sunlight reached across the floor, touching the lilies and the edge of my desk. I made coffee, stepped outside, and looked over the small garden I had built from nothing. The jasmine had grown tall enough to climb the porch rail, wrapping itself around the wood with quiet determination. I thought of how much I had lost, and how much had quietly taken its place. Peace, boundaries, and a kind of love that no longer needed payment or proof. The phone rang once more, but this time it was just the sound of the world calling. Not a demand, not a plea. I let it ring. I had work to do, the living kind. Spring returned to Austin the following year, soft and green. The air smelled of wet soil and magnolia. My garden was thick with color by then. Roses, thyme, small violets that had seeded themselves between the stones. Every morning I sat with a cup of tea and watched sunlight climb over the fence. The same fence that once marked the edge of my silence. Life had grown calm, predictable in the best way. I volunteered twice a week at the botanical garden, labeling seedlings and talking to visitors about native plants. I painted when the light was good, sold a few pieces at a local fair, and used the money to buy new brushes. Nothing extravagant, just small exchanges that felt like balance instead of sacrifice. Mark visited regularly. He never arrived empty-handed. Sometimes groceries, sometimes flowers from the kids. He had started a new job, one that required him to travel less. Each time he came, he helped in the garden, turning soil, trimming branches. He did not talk much about the past anymore. Neither did I. We had both learned that peace grows only in the present. The children were older now. They ran barefoot through the yard, chasing each other around the pecan tree. Sometimes they asked questions I could not answer. "Grandma, why don't you live with Daddy?" "Because we both have our own homes," I said. "That's what grown-ups do." They accepted that easily, as children do when the tone is gentle and sure. One afternoon Claire came by. It was early May, the sky clear and blue, the air heavy with jasmine. I was kneeling by the flower bed when I heard the sound of her car pulling up. For a moment I thought about pretending not to hear. But something inside me stayed still. She stepped out holding a bouquet of white tulips. "I know lilies are your favorite," she said, "but the store only had these." "They're lovely," I said, and took them from her hands. We sat on the porch for a while without speaking. The children's laughter drifted from the yard. Finally she said, "Mark told me what you said to him, that love isn't debt. I think about that a lot." I nodded. "It's a lesson that costs something." "I used to think you were judging me," she said softly. "But I see now that you were just trying to hold your ground. I'm sorry I made you feel unwanted." Her voice trembled, and for the first time in years, I saw her without the armor of pride. Just a young woman who had made her own mistakes and was trying to understand them. "I accept your apology," I said. "We all outgrow the version of ourselves that needs too much from others." She looked at me, eyes wet but steady. "Thank you." We spent the afternoon with the children, baking cookies and talking about school plays. It was easy, unforced. When they left, Claire hugged me briefly. It was not the kind of hug that erases the past, but one that acknowledges it. That evening I sat on the porch, the tulips beside me. The petals were opening in the warmth, white as folded paper. I thought about how strange it is that life repairs itself quietly, while we're busy counting what we lost. The next morning, I walked to the botanical garden before sunrise. The air was cool, the paths still damp from sprinklers. I stood under a canopy of oak leaves and listened to the sound of water trickling through the irrigation pipes. every drop deliberate, every root receiving exactly what it needed. I thought of my years of giving, how I had poured too much too freely until I had nothing left for myself. The boundary I had drawn was not a wall, it was irrigation. It was choosing where my water went. When I got home, Mark's car was already in the driveway. He was sitting on the porch steps with 2 cups of coffee. I was in the neighborhood, he said. I thought I'd stop by. We sat together watching the light creep across the lawn. He told me about a promotion about the kids' new school. I listened, smiling. When he paused, I said, "You're doing well." He nodded. "Because of you." "No," I said gently. "Because you finally started living within your own means, of money and heart." He laughed quietly. "You always make things sound simple. They are simple, just not easy." We stayed there until the sun climbed high, the world around us bright and ordinary. It was the kind of morning I had dreamed about without knowing it. No tension, no apology waiting to be spoken, just a quiet understanding between 2 people who had finally learned where love begins and ends. When he left, I went inside and wrote in my notebook, "Boundaries are not punishment. They are the map that leads you home." That night, I slept with the windows open. The air smelled of jasmine and new grass, and I thought, perhaps for the first time, that peace had stopped being a visitor. It had unpacked its bags and decided to stay. By late summer, the air in Austin grew thick with the hum of cicadas. Evening light poured gold over everything. The fence, the lawn, the old pecan tree whose branches had begun to hang low with the season's weight. I spent most afternoons on the porch, a cup of green tea cooling in my hands, the jasmine curling along the railing beside me. The days followed a quiet rhythm now. Mornings in the garden, afternoons painting by the window, evenings reading or sitting outside until the first stars appeared. The house had become a companion, not a burden. A small breathing thing that asked nothing and gave back stillness in return. Mark came every few weeks with the children. He helped me prune the shrubs, sometimes repaired small things around the house. We spoke less of the past with every visit, as though the silence itself was mending what words could not. One evening, the children ran through the yard chasing fireflies. The youngest, Jake, stopped suddenly and turned toward me, his small hand still cupped around a flicker of light. "Grandma," he asked, "are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I looked at his open face and thought of how many years I had spent chasing that same answer through other people's approval, through money and sacrifice, through all the ways I had tried to buy belonging. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, smiling, "because I am finally living in my own home." He nodded, as if he understood perfectly, and ran off again, his laughter rising through the warm night air. The scent of jasmine deepened with the dusk. I watched the children dart among the flowers, their laughter mixing with the chorus of insects. Inside, the kitchen light glowed softly through the window, reflecting off the polished table that had once belonged to my mother. I thought of everything that table had seen me: counting bills, signing checks, writing letters that ended one life and began another. Now it only held cups of tea, a vase of tulips, and my notebook, half filled with words that no longer hurt to write. The world had shrunk to what I could hold and care for with both hands. That was enough. Later, after they had all gone home and the house was quiet again, I sat by the window and looked out at the garden. Fireflies drifted among the plants like tiny lanterns. Somewhere nearby, a train passed, its distant rumble fading into the dark. I opened my notebook one last time and wrote, "Love is not money. Boundaries make peace possible. Truth always comes to light." Then I closed it and placed it on the shelf beside the old family photos, those I had decided to keep. In some, I still stood at the edges, half forgotten, but I did not mind. The woman in those pictures no longer needed to be seen by everyone. She had finally learned to see herself. The clock ticked softly. The garden breathed in the dark. And I sat still, neither lonely nor waiting, only present, surrounded by the quiet proof of a life reclaimed. The wind carried the scent of jasmine through the open window, and the night settled around me like a promise kept.